Shalom and welcome to Life Lessons. We find ourselves in Lesson 14. We began from the beginning of Genesis, Chumash Bereshit, and actually now we're holding in the second section of the second book of Exodus known as Shemot. And this section is known as Parshat VAEIRA. VAEIRA means, and I revealed myself. This section deals with a very important part of the beginning of Jewish history, and this is the coming to the Exodus. In the last section was about the slavery. Pharaoh had forgotten about Joseph and all the wonderful thing that he has done. And then he was afraid of the Jewish people, of the Hebrews, and he enslaved them, inflicted them. And towards the end of the last section was when God has told Moses that he should go and tell Pharaoh, let the Jews go. And Pharaoh didn't want to listen. Things had only gotten worse. And in this section over here, it begins by saying that God spoke to Moshe and he said to him, Ani Hashem, I am God. And therefore it's time for you to tell the Jewish people that they will come out of this slavery. And then he tells him, and if Pharaoh doesn't listen, there's going to be a series of plagues. And as we know, that began a series of 10 plagues. But it's very interesting when we look very deeper about what's going on here. To begin with a very important question, if God is trying to send a message that he should let the people go, we're talking about not about a regular person, regular king, we're talking about the Almighty. So the Almighty could have done one big plague and the whole thing is done. What is this? I don't want to use the words game, but it seems like there's a game over here or an important message here that there had to be 10 plagues and had to be this kind of an order. And obviously there's going to be a message here. So the first thing is we are told there's two people here, there's two sections that are getting this message. There is the Egyptians themselves, that they have no idea whatsoever about God. This is all a surprise to them. To many of them, Pharaoh has convinced them that he is God. He himself. And all of a sudden, the Jews are saying that it cannot be, human being cannot be God. And there's a whole different entity that's something that we can't see, and this is God himself. I had a friend many years ago when he was a little kid in the former Soviet Union, and he was in class, and as you know, it was very difficult for Jewish kids to be under the communist regime. Anyways, the teacher was explaining to the class a very important phenomena. He said to them, you should know, you could only believe something that you see. But something that you don't see, you don't have to believe. And not only you don't have to believe, then it's not true. And basically what he was trying to tell them, because he knew about my friend, the Jewish kid that was in the class, that was observant, religious, and believed in one God. So he's trying to tell the class, well, if you can't point your finger and show where exactly this God is, obviously, he doesn't exist. He was then, I think, 8 or 9 years old. This kid raised his hand and he had a question to the teacher. Now, this was very far away from Moscow. In one of those regions, then was the former Soviet Union, was in Kazakhstan, I think in a place called Tashkent. And this is the 60s. Hardly any people then had televisions. So he turns to the teacher and he says, "Tell me, who is the president of the Soviet Union?" So he says with the full confidence, "Brezhnev." The kid, my friend, turns to him and says, "Have you ever seen him?" So the teacher says, "No." So then he, with a full confidence, he gets up and says, "Well, he doesn't exist." Where he obviously got punished, kicked out, and went through a very hardship for what he did. But I remember when he came, he left the Soviet Union in the 70s, and then we ended up being in the same class in New York. So he told me once the story, and I found it very interesting, Here, so many people will see, do we see everything, even in the times now that we have internet and everything? Do we see everything? Do we know everything? But anyways, that's the idea here. So the people in Egypt, step number one of the lessons is here, is for them themselves. We have a pagan country. They don't believe in God whatsoever. With one plague, it's very possible the message doesn't get there. When you're trying to teach a lesson, sometimes you could teach a lesson by force. You teach by force, so you proved your point, but did the people understand? Sometimes you need more than one lesson. So I would almost look on these 10 plagues as 10 lessons of God showing that He is in charge. And therefore, one big event, we have people nowadays, they will tell you this probably was a supernatural disaster. Why we got attacked by so many frogs, or something happened to the earth, was this unbelievable climate change that the water changed into blood. And who knows what, we could find explanation for each of these plagues. But if you look on them as a series, they were once a month with 3 weeks of warning, 1 week of the plague itself, you have to start thinking what's going on over here when the rest of the world is not getting these kinds of plagues. So one idea is for them themselves, the Egyptians, Pharaoh, they need a little bit of education to understand who this God is that we're talking about. The second thing, I think this is even more important, is a lesson for the Jewish people themselves. Something that they believe because they received an education from their parents, great-grandparents, going all the way to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. So they know about this one God, that we believe in one God. And this God promised that He will take them out of slavery. However, that also needs a very important lesson. So we see there is an idea here why the 10 plagues. But why is it divided that way? Our commentators tell us something very important here. That the first 9 plagues is really a series of 3 times 3. So each one of them, so in other words, there is here a triple message. And each message is repeated 3 times. The 10th one is obviously the final blow, and that is not for the sake of an important message, but that's something else completely. The final plague, the firstborns, where they actually came out of Egypt. So really what we're concentrating is the introduction that came to the final plague, that this is 9, and each one of them is a set of 3. We see that many places in the Torah, in the Bible, and in the Talmud, that they tell us when God wants to confirm something, it's always 3. And not only this, to establish a situation where a person could say that belongs to him, she or him, is the idea always of 3. In Jewish law, if a person owns a place for 3 years, that establishes a certain kind of ownership. So the idea of 3 is a very powerful thing. It happened once, so you say, Maybe it's a mistake. It happened twice. Who knows? 3 times, that's already confirming a situation. So 3 is a strength of confirmation. So we understand the idea of 3 times 3. But what are these ideas that he's trying to teach us? So we're going to go back to the last section, to a very important verse, and that is on chapter 5, verse 1 and 2. So the verse says as follows: Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh, till finally they were able to get in. They got into his palace, and they said to him, "We have an important message from you. This is what the God of Israel, had said. Let my people go, and they should be able to serve me in the desert." A one-line message, nothing complicated. You are holding people hostage in your country, and God is basically telling you you're doing the wrong thing. So he's asking you a simple thing: let them go. And I want them out of that country. They need to go back from where they came from, and that was Israel. So you have to let them go out of Egypt. The answer of Pharaoh sets the stage here about what's happening. The second verse says as follows, and it's kind of a long answer, but from that we understand what's on Pharaoh's mind. So the verse says as follows: Pharaoh said, "Who is this God that I should listen to him to send the Jews out, the Israelites out? I don't know this God, and I will not send them away." Kind of you could have said, "No, I don't want." So he goes and says, "What? A message from God? Never heard of him. I don't know who that is." So, but the way it's phrased here is very interesting. Who is this God that I should listen to him? One idea. Second thing he says, it's not only who is this God, I don't know about this kind of a God, and I will not send them away. I saw some very interesting commentators that explain, and with that we'll understand what's happening here with the plagues. To come and say, "I believe in God," it's an interesting statement, "I believe in God," but that entitles a few things in this belief of God. First, there is, I believe that God exists. I believe there is a God. That by itself not always is enough. I could believe in God. I believe that God exists. But then you say to yourself, what does God got to do with my life? In other words, to come to step 1 is, I'm accepting that I believe there's a God in this world. Others, and we know there exist others in this world that don't believe that at all. So step number 1, to believe that there is a God in this world, is very important. But then, even after I believe there's a God in this world, I could still start saying to myself, okay, fine, there's a God in this world, but what does that got to do with me personally, with my personal life, with my personal job, with my family? What does that got to do with me? So comes here a very important point, that I believe that God is in charge of this world. Not only that there is a phenomena of a great creator. We find in some of the verses that they say in the olden days, people used to say, okay, I accept that God created the world. He created the world and then he went to sleep. He did an unbelievable thing, creation. I accept there is creation, but that's it. He created a natural world and now it runs by itself and we don't need the creator there. However, that's, in other words, that brings out the point. So it's not enough just to say that there is a creator. So comes step number 2, and this is what Pharaoh is denying here. First he says, what God? And then he says, I have no knowledge of this God. To have knowledge means you understand that this God is in charge. I got no knowledge of this. Now, there's another point. Even after you do have knowledge, and I understand that God is in charge, and in the Hasidic language, it's called divine providence. That nothing is by accident. That God is running this world, and whatever happens to each one of us, there's no mistakes. God knows what's going on, and everything is on purpose. And if we look on our lives and we examine it, we'll realize that so many things that maybe we thought was just a fluke or some mistake there, not necessarily so. Everything is meant to be the way it was. And even, God forbid, in the negative, also it meant to be that way, or to take out a lesson, or to learn something from it, to advance because of it. But everything has its purpose, so that means that God is in charge of this world. So we went from knowing there is God to the point that God is in charge of this world. So then you come and you say to yourself, okay, God is in charge of this world. Very good. So divine providence. But does that mean, could he change the situation? When there is a situation already on the ground, could God come and change that situation? That's talking about now that I accept that God could perform miracles. Not only that I believe that there is a God, not only that I believe that he's in charge and running this world, more than that, I believe that when he wants to, he could perform miracle and change the situation completely. When things look so bad, when the doctor says there is no chance whatsoever of recovery, this individual definitely, according to nature, is not going to make it. God could come and say, okay, that's the doctor's opinion. God's opinion is maybe different. And that's why we find that we have prayers and all these things. Because when we have prayers to God, what are we trying to touch? We're trying to touch that level of God where he could change things. But that's already a very high belief, that not just I believe he exists, not only that I believe he's in charge, because I could say he's in charge, but not necessarily he's going to change from nature the way things are. He's in charge, but that's what he wants. He wants to be a natural world. When the doctor says you're not going to recover, for example, that's what's going to happen. No, there's something way beyond that it could change. And many things like this. So really, those are 3 things that Pharaoh and the Egyptians were denying it completely. They were denying the existence of God. They were denying the divine providence of God. And they were denying that he could change nature. So now we'll understand something very interesting. If you look very carefully in the Torah itself, before the introduction, before the plagues began, and we said before there are a set of 3, before each set starts, there's an introduction. There's a one line that God tells Moses, go tell Pharaoh. So here is going to happen an educational process for the Jewish people, to enforce what they know. It's always very helpful to have reinforcement. And for the Egyptians, something that they don't know. So it's not going to work from the hardest point. It's going to go from easy to the hardest. So the first thing is they even have to believe that there is a God. So the verse says as follows here, and that is in chapter 7, verse 4. It starts in 14, but specifically here on verse 17. Thus says God, you should know with this plague that's coming now, you should know that I am God. There's no more explanations here. Just a simple introduction. With this you should know. With this you will know that I am God. Now, take my staff, hit the water, and it will turn into blood. But what is the introduction to that? One line. So the first 3 plagues is to drill inside the Egyptians that there is a God. The water turns into blood, frogs all over, and the lice. These 3 was a very strong that we see by the end of the 3rd one. The magicians were able to also to turn water to blood. They were also able to bring flour. When he came, he says, how about to bring in lice at the very teeny? They couldn't do that. So the magician turned to Pharaoh and says, this is God's action. This is no human could do such a thing. But what the message that I got from these 3 plagues, that there is a God. So this is what happened in the first 3. When it came the introduction to the second set, it's very interesting. Over there he says, this is when he's going to send in the mixed multitude of animals. He says like this. So you should know that I am God bekerev haaretz. So you should know I am God in midst of this land. Not just that I am God. I am God that's in charge of this place. This is what he's introducing now to him. In order that you know that I am God on earth. Till now, that I am God. You just need to know that there's such a thing of a God. Now, the next 3, he's talking about that I am God of the earth. Okay? And this is what happens now with the next one, because the next one is going to show clear divine providence. It's going to show very, very, in a striking way, they come and they only hurt the Egyptians, for example. Then it says there was a plague and only the animals of the Egyptians died, not the animals of the Jewish people. It's showing now, well, if there's a plague and this is a natural phenomena, then how come who lives here survives and the one that's here doesn't? So this is showing a little more the divine providence that it is existing here. So this second set is teaching the second point that Pharaoh was missing and he did not understand. So successful on the first point to teach him there's a God. Now he's teaching him that this God is also in charge of the world. Now comes a very important point. Because all these 2 things, we say it's part of the education here, to help Pharaoh to understand. But we could only imagine in Pharaoh's mind that he's thinking to himself, this is wonderful. However, does that mean, do I have to send them out because they're already here? Could God really, okay, let's say I believe in God. I believe that he's in charge, but could he change the situation? Could he take something that's already going on for such a long time and all of a sudden perform a miracle? That Pharaoh wasn't ready for. Now came Moshe and introduced to him the final 3. And he says to him, and now you should know there's nobody like me on earth. He added on, there's nobody can do what I'm going to do. To be in charge, you could find a lot of people that take charge. But to come and change the situation, only I could do that. And this is what the next plagues, this is what they come in. So this is what's happening over here. We have all of a sudden the hail that is coming down, the darkness, and the locust. All this is bringing out the point is how God could change the situation. Now he should be able to get the point. We know Pharaoh was stubborn until the end, but at least this is a process of this message to teach us. And this is a very important message that we need to know for ourselves. And this is what we take out from it. Obviously, the foundation is that there is a God. And that's very important. But what comes now, as we develop our understanding about God, we understand also about the divine providence. And more that we understand is that if he wants to, he could change things. And this is a very, very important lesson that began with the Exodus and for all the generations to come. Whenever we find ourselves or with challenges or in the positive, always to remember these things. There is a God, he is in charge, and if he wants to, he could change the situation. And therefore, whenever we find ourselves, whatever situation, we have the power to do it and to connect ourselves to the Almighty, and this is what's very important to us. Thank you very much.